Hello, and welcome to the Informing Choices mini-pod. In this episode, we will be looking at why we need to be integrating Foresight to human-centric change programs to help enterprise design, create, and implement effective, future-focused change that focuses on people. Regular listeners will know that I am not the usual presenter, and you are right. My name is Islay O'Hara, and I will be your guest host for this episode, as your regular host, Futurist Steve Wells, is in the guest seat, along with change consultant Jennifer Bryan. Welcome to the show, Steve and Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Islay.
Steve and Jennifer have been working on a project integrating Foresight with human-centric change methodology. But before we start our discussions, Steve, would you like to introduce yourself?
I would. Thank you, Islay. So I'm a futurist, which means I spend my time thinking about the different trends and drivers that may lead us to what I hope will be a more human future. And that includes looking at plausible scenarios and working out how we might change to reach the better of those plausible scenarios in the future.
Thank you, Steve. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself and remind us of your background?
Yes, thank you very much, Islay. So hello, everybody. Jennifer Bryan. I am a change consultant and practitioner, as well as published author. I've worked with nearly 40 companies now for just over 20 years in leading change. And where I focus and add value is very much on that people-centric side of change. I come from a learning and development background, and I have a philosophy that there is no change without learning and no learning without change. The two go very much hand in hand.
Fabulous. This is going to be a very interesting discussion. So let's get right into it. Leading change with foresight for growth. Steve, can you start us off by explaining why organizations need to take a different approach to change?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that organizations need to accept that they need to change. And I think that's very much about adopting a new mindset. I mean, it was Einstein that basically said it was foolish to keep doing what we've always done and expect something different. Or as I say, let's not keep doing what we've always done, because getting what we've always got is basically tantamount to going backwards. And that's because the world around us moves on. And I think what causes organizations, I think, to take a new approach to thinking about change and the future is the idea that whilst in the past we've been able to come to consensus about how to move forward because we've been able to predict the future, those days are long gone. Consensus is much harder to come to when we think about the future. And part of that is because there is increasing uncertainty in the future. So it's a kind of transition from ordinary change leadership to extraordinary change leadership. And I think that people need to be very clearly at the heart of that change, because it's people that keep our enterprises and our organizations successful. And that's going to become more and more important in the future as more and more of our processes are automated.
Yeah, for sure. And as you say, within the current environment, especially, there are so many questions arising concerning not just the nature of change, the change now, but the future side of change, but most fundamentally, and what we're here to talk about today, the human face of change. Jennifer, can you explain to us why it's so important now to put people at the heart of change? And what are the critical components of a human-centric change approach?
Change doesn't happen without people. It's that simple. It's people who actually enable the change to happen. They do it. You can put in a fantastic process or system, but that doesn't necessarily drive change. People have to make the decision that they are actually going to engage with that process or system and work with it in whatever capacity that may be. So as a result, that is really paramount in actually enabling change to happen. It just doesn't happen otherwise. And it certainly doesn't happen quickly otherwise either. And taking into point in regards to the human-centric change, I would say the critical elements is very much taking on board those change contexts externally and internally. So when Steve and I work together, we talk a lot about scenarios and other future elements like political side of things, the economic side of things, social technology, all of those different elements, which are the external elements that have an impact on change. But there's also a load of internal elements that have an impact on change. For example, the existing processes and systems, the culture, teams, the technology. What is it about all of those different elements that may help the change or hinder the change? And when you look at those contexts, you can look at them very objectively from a task or system perspective. But what I would actually really advocate, bringing that human centric side, is actually looking at it from the people's perspective. What impact is that going to have on their jobs, how they do things, the ways in which they work, on the teams, and as a result, the culture and how they interact with one another, as well as the impact it has on their social and family life? How are they going to feel about that? Are they going to be happy about it? Are they going to be reticent? Or are they actually going to be really angry? All of that plays an impact on whether the change A happens, and B, at what level of adoption does it happen, which of course has a major impact on the delivery and the embedment of the actual change within an organization.
Because this complexity, as you've outlined, and the emotional impact of change must put a lot of companies, it must intimidate a lot of companies. So this point of change, at what point the change process is initiated, is key to the success. I want to talk a little bit about how foresight fits into the change process. From my understanding, we've had a lot of change models which have been honed over the years, and many of these change models look back at what we've done and they try to fix what we've done in the past. How is bringing foresight into this discussion going to change the way we look at change and the way we create change methodologies and build change methodologies for the future? Steve, I'm going to ask that to you.
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things that I've observed is that, many organizations, when they find they need to make a change, do so out of necessity. There's something that's on their desk right now that they've got to find a solution for right now. The problem is that if the rest of the world, if the outside world is moving at such a pace, I mean, we've kind of got used to the idea of change being a constant, and we're gradually getting used to the idea of change being exponential. So taking a new perspective on change, one that identifies what some of the potential drivers of change into the future, I think is absolutely essential. Otherwise, what we do, we use all our energy up changing for a world that actually is going to pass us by in the very near future. So I think that's why it's critically important to understand what are the drivers that are taking us to a point that's telling us we need to change. What are the trends that we're seeing? How might those trends in the future impact the way that the organization operates, the way that we give value to our customers and clients? And the other thing that I think is critically important to build in is a sense of uncertainty, because if we think that we can really predict the mid and long range future, then actually we're kidding ourselves. But the interesting thing is that most bigger organizations are doing precisely that. They are kidding themselves, because processes, systems, behaviors, culture inside many organizations is set up for certainty. There are kind of human reasons for that. The way that actually our limbic systems help us resist change, it's part of our biological makeup. So we can understand why, but we do need to put something in place that allows us to build in uncertainty to our future. And that's why I think plausible scenarios can play a critically important part. That's not to say that we're trying to pick our favorite scenario and predict one change future, but what we're trying to do is come to terms with the fact that there is uncertainty in our future, and that one of the things that we might need to be prepared to do is to change as we move towards the future. And I think that's a very different skill. It's a different kind of piece of organizational culture that really doesn't exist right now.
I'd like to add something to that, if I may. The reason why foresight, in my opinion, is really critical when planning change is that if we just plan a change for the right here and now, then where does that take us when we're trying to go forward? When we're looking for a change, we're not looking for necessarily just the immediate. We're actually trying to change the organization for a future. And that future is not in the now. And so we need to take that into context, that how will the future elements impact the now and how we actually deliver that change. The other thing we need to bear in mind is that where people are at right now, where they may be next week, much like next year, can be very different. You know, circumstances change for people, and we've got to bear that in mind. At Christmas 2019, not very many of us thought we'd be all in a huge global lockdown and so forth, you know, and suddenly we were. And that had a major impact on how we did things and what we did and who we did it with, if anybody. And we've got to look at the future and plan for the future in the best way that we can. We can't predict everything, but if we only plan for the right here and now, then we're not going to get very far.
Just to build on the kind of connection that you've made there for me, Jennifer, as well. And this is the kind of the connection between the foresight and the human side, because I think one of the things that we might typically forget to do is to understand the kind of the what's in it for me question. So the person at the head of the organization that might be looking to facilitate the change, what's in it for them? Because actually those might well be very personal aspirations and fears. But then also try to understand what's the nature of the control that people that will be subject to the change feel they have, and how do we address those? What is it we need to do within the change program that pays attention to the very human emotions and the way those human emotions might change given the reality of uncertainty and being exposed to uncertainty and complexity. So I think that's why when we bring foresight together with human-centric change, we actually get something potentially that's really different, that can really help motivate people to think about change in the context of the future and not change in the context of the present. Because if we do focus on change for the present, then I think we're likely to be back here in 18 or 24 months' time with the same challenge on our desks.
I think so, because we are human at the end of the day. Our fears of change, our perhaps unwillingness to look further into the future because we can't see that far into the future. So as naturally, we draw on experiences to date, the experiences of our parents and other people that we've worked with. So I can see that the project you're working on is going to be hugely valuable as we go forward. And the approach that you're taking will ensure that an organization's greatest asset, its people, is being paid proper attention to, whether the changes are being seen as radical or incremental, because I can understand and see how it marries the person and the change task together in different future and discussing the future plausible scenarios. Steve and Jennifer, this has been a really interesting discussion. Steve, how can people get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch with me is to find me on my website, stevewells.uk, or just Google Steve Wells. You'll find him somewhere.
And Jennifer, how can people get in touch with you?
They can also get in touch with me via my two websites, either abchangeconsultancy.com or jenniferlbryan.com.
Thank you, Steve and Jennifer, once again for your time. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Do let your friends and colleagues know about the Informing Choices mini-pod, and your regular host, Steve Wells, will be back in the interviewer's chair very soon.